Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes. It's one of The Simpsons' most iconic scenes, involving one of the show's all-time greatest characters, and it's a running gag that they've returned to again and again.
Rakes, my old arch-enemy.
But, unfortunately, it's not the only inside joke involving Sideshow Bob's face that the show would keep bringing back year after year. Because in season 21, the show introduced an incredibly disturbing new running joke that has turned Sideshow Bob into one of my least favorite characters.
Hello, everyone.
At the risk of sounding like Marge in one of those early Treehouse of Horror episodes, today's video
Is really scary.
and features some disturbing imagery that some viewers may find upsetting. Or, well, at least I find them upsetting. So after a string of iconic Sideshow Bob episodes in the 90s, the show wasn't exactly sure how to continue to utilize the character. As the show went on, Sideshow Bob got married, had a son, and even joined forces with the rest of his family in his murderous quest. But it all fell a little flat. Clearly, they were running out of ideas on how to keep getting mileage out of this character. And it was at the end of season 21 that they took the character's scheming to a disturbing new level.
Say, Bob, why do you keep measuring my face?
Just passing the time, Bunky.
Episode 1, The Bob Next Door. The episode is from season 21, and it features Sideshow Bob escaping prison by, well, removing his own face and swapping it with his unconscious cellmate who's set to be released.
I began by removing Walt's face. Five-second rule.
Not only is this premise a little out there, but some of that gruesome surgery is actually shown on screen.
That was the easy part. The hard part was removing my own face. Luckily, as Krusty's sidekick, I'd been hit with so many pies that my face had lost all sensation. Or so I thought.
When I first saw this scene, I felt a little squeamish about it, but to some extent I was actually kinda impressed. Like, the writers and animators didn't do the obvious thing, which was have the face swapping occur off-screen. They showed us some grisly details.
The final reattachment was a mere bagatelle. Or so I thought.
Unfortunately, the horror didn't end there. So after getting out of prison with his new face and identity, Sideshow Bob moves in next door to The Simpsons, and naturally uses the disguise to lure Bart far from home to try and kill him. Normal cartoon stuff. And after Bart's fears are confirmed, and he discovers his new neighbor was Sideshow Bob all along, we're treated to this horrifically disturbing scene.
Hey, looks like you've got a loose thread on your collar.
No, don't! My face! My beautiful borrowed face!
What the fuck did I just see? As a reminder, this is not a Treehouse of Horror. The Sideshow Bob we've known and loved since season 1, the lovable, aristocratic clown sidekick with his desire to kill offset by his occasionally warm heart, just had his fucking face ripped off by a waitress.
Looks like you've got a loose thread on your collar.
No, don't!
I just noticed in this watch through that you can even see Bart in the background with tape over his mouth fucking screaming, witnessing this horror. At this point, when I watched the episode the first time, I honestly considered just turning the TV off. This was just too gross and upsetting for a Simpsons episode. And yes, I'm aware that this premise is a reference to the movie Face Off, but it's not like that makes it any less disturbing to see in The Simpsons. So Bob's cellmate Walt, who now has Bob's face and hair, escaped prison and was pursuing Bob in an attempt to save Bart and get his face back. So, naturally, we're treated to the exact same horrifying scene, but with Walt instead.
Hey, handsome. Is that a loose thread on your collar?
Holy fuck! Animators actually had to draw this twice. At this point, in order to finish watching the episode, I've got my hands prepared to cover my eyes in the event that these deranged Simpsons writers want to subject the audience again to one of these horrifying face fall off scenes. And fun fact, this horror show was only rated TV PG. Ultimately, Bob's plan is foiled in like the laziest way possible. It turns out Bart had already called the police hours ago, and they eventually just show up and arrest him. That said, the episode honestly did have a pretty clever original premise, and a handful of funny jokes, but like way too much disturbing animation. So, when I first saw this, once the episode ended, Naturally, there was only one thing I could do.
I was on the internet within minutes, registering my disgust throughout the world.
However, I was shocked to encounter a very different reaction online. A lot of fans seemed to, well, love it. IGN said it was tied for the best episode of the season. AOL called it one of the best Sideshow Bob episodes ever, if not the very best. A few folks seemed put off by the horrific animation, but by and large, fans seem to like this episode despite how sadistically it treats this beloved character. Am I the only one disturbed by this? Am I so out of touch?
No, it's the children who are wrong.
Okay, well, I should address the elephant in the room here. There is actually some precedent for this type of disturbing humor in The Simpsons. In fact, one could argue that one of the greatest episodes of all time not only did pretty much the same joke, but took it to an even more disturbing extreme. I'm talking, of course, about the ending of Treehouse of Horror V.
Relax, honey. You were just having a crazy nightmare. You're back with your family now where there's nothing to be afraid of. Except that fog that turns people inside out. Huh?
Uh-oh, it's seeping in.
There it is, there's the precedent. How can I hate the Bob Next Door and love this classic Halloween episode if they do the exact same gory joke? Well, I would argue that the context makes these two scenes very different. It may sound silly to say this about a fictional world, but the events of the Bob Next Door occur in the quote-unquote real Springfield. The Springfield of Lisa's substitute and Homer and Marge's first date and countless other joys and heartbreaks. Treehouse of Horror, however, takes place in the fake, non-canon Springfield. The horror movie-inspired events of these episodes are not happening to the real Simpsons, but to versions of them that only exist in the characters' imaginations. If the show were to do a parody of Face Off in a Halloween segment, maybe that would be a little different. But regular canon episodes have very different rules than the Treehouse of Horrors. But you might ask, so what? The writers and animators tortured a beloved character in one episode. That doesn't ruin Sideshow Bob. He can still return to having fun, wacky misadventures in future episodes. Nope. Episode 2, The Man Who Grew Too Much. After the Bob Next Door, the next full-fledged Sideshow Bob episode is in season 25. The episode had promise. It features Sideshow Bob getting a job as a scientist and becoming friends with Lisa as the two of them bond over their shared love of knowledge. But any delusions I may have had that this episode would be a return to non-shitty Sideshow Bob episodes would be squashed within 1 minute of the character appearing on screen.
Simpsons, there's no need for alarm. That's not for you to suck. Now, where was I?
Excuse me, what? What the actual fuck? Like, why? There's so much to unpack here. Not only are we subjected to a callback to that same disturbing imagery from season 21, they then take it to 1,000 by having baby Maggie try to put Sideshow Bob's sliced off face in her freaking mouth. And it doesn't even make any damn sense within the context of the episode. It's never explained why his face randomly falls off. Like... Anyway, if you think that's bad, don't worry, there's more. Things somehow go even further off the rails when later we learn that Sideshow Bob's evil plan all along has been to, wait for it, splice his DNA with animal DNA, turning himself into a literal superhuman monster. At this point, I'm less disturbed and more just like, okay, Simpsons writers, whatever. And, insultingly enough, the episode ends on a frickin' Rake callback. Thankfully, unlike the Bob Next Door, this episode was actually largely hated by reviewers. Anyway, you might be understanding now why the title of this video says that the face-swapping stuff ruined Sideshow Bob. It wasn't just confined to that one episode. At this point, it looked like it was somehow becoming a running gag in its own right. And honestly, it's a running gag that showcases just how bad the show had gotten around this time. Season 25 is very hit or miss. While it has some standout episodes, it also brought about some of the worst half hours I've ever seen on TV. This one being a great example. The early to mid-20s seasons actually had a number of these weird, gross-out body horror type gags like this. And it was really emblematic of a show that had been on the air for so long that it just felt no obligation to treat its characters as real people anymore. However, as I've mentioned before, the show has actually rebounded in terms of quality a bit, particularly in the late 20s seasons. They started making episodes again that treated the characters like actual human beings. But despite the show starting to have more and more decent episodes, I was still wary when, in season 29, we got another Sideshow Bob episode. But much to my surprise, this episode, called Gone Boy, was not only the best Sideshow Bob episode in years,
This is the boy. Never seen him in my life. We all get tattoos we regret.
but one of the best all-around episodes of the show in a long time. Best of all, Sideshow Bob's face stays on the entire episode. Wow, what a concept. At this point I thought, maybe, just maybe, the Simpsons writers had finally gotten over their weird little obsession with having Sideshow Bob's face fall off. Which is why I was so disappointed in season 31 when the writer's more psychopathic tendencies came right back just 2 minutes into the next Sideshow Bob outing. Episode 3, Bobby, It's Cold Outside. The episode picks up where the previous one left off, with Sideshow Bob living in a lighthouse. And then this happens.
Do you have any deep, dark secrets?
Merry Christmas, Father. Stay out of trouble. Nope, no secrets.
What's especially offensive about this montage is putting an iconic scene from Cape Fear right up against the horrifying face peeling scene, and then of course, adding a new face fall off gag, just in case we weren't disturbed enough already. Thankfully, that's the only truly disturbing scene in the episode, but starting the show off that way, in a Christmas episode no less, really just sets a terrible tone for what was otherwise ultimately kind of a sweet episode. If a gentle breeze can blow Bob's skin off, how the hell are we supposed to react to this bizarrely brutal scene later in the episode?
Now, Homer, gently place me on the porch, and when they steal me, follow them to their lair.
Will do.
Ah! Go!
If that bike scene was any indication, Bob should be a writhing, skinless pulp inside that box. Mercifully, he's just fine. But given the writer's track record with this stuff, you'd be forgiven for wanting to cover your eyes for this whole scene. So honestly, whenever I see Sideshow Bob on screen now, I'm just like anxious at what grisly, disturbing fate he might befall. So maybe I guess I should acknowledge that I'm probably more sensitive to this sort of gross out imagery than most people, but like, it seems clear as day to me that this sort of thing is like way over the line, way too disturbing for a show like The Simpsons. Honestly, I'm shocked Kelsey Grammer is even willing to come back and keep doing these episodes. The guy who played Fraiser Crane really does not strike me as someone who would be into body horror, but somehow they keep getting him back to keep this running gag going. So I want to look at exactly why I find this so disturbing, and I feel like you should too. What is body horror? I've used the term body horror a couple times so far, and I think it sums up exactly what's happening in these episodes. TVTropes.org defines body horror as any form of horror or squickiness involving body parts, parasitism, disfigurement, mutation, or unsettling bodily configuration. And on the body horror page, there's even a whole subcategory of facial horror, described this way. Much like audiences get squicked out by horrible things happening to our body or our eyes, so too do they get absolutely sickened by the thought of something horrible and permanent happening to our faces. There's another subcategory within facial horror called tear off your face. So yeah, it's a trope, apparently. There are few sights more gruesome than that of a human face with all the skin removed. I agree. But body horror is just that. Horror. When done correctly, body horror can actually be incredibly effective and entertaining, I think. From David Lynch's Eraserhead to John Carpenter's The Thing, and to one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, Evil Dead. But then to have body horror in a children's movie like, say, Spy Kids. I know that may sound contradictory, but that's why I think context is so important with this stuff. The Simpsons can pull off body horror, like in Treehouse of Horror V, or even in a more recent Halloween special, Treehouse of Horror XXVIII. In my opinion, this episode is actually a decent example of the writers doing body horror right. Despite the show's willingness to subject viewers to unparalleled horrors in previous Sideshow Bob episodes without warning, this Treehouse of Horror segment actually brought back that old-fashioned disclaimer.
What you're about to see is so disgusting, you'll watch Game of Thrones to calm down. You have been warned.
The premise, which I'll remind you is fictional within the Simpsons universe, has Homer accidentally discovering a hankering for his own flesh, and he becomes an auto-cannibal. And frankly, it is a really disturbing premise, but it's couched in the non-canon world of the Treehouse of Horror, and the animation never really goes overboard with the gore. And yet, lots of people actually thought this episode was too gory. Given how much I hate the Sideshow Bob face stuff, you're probably surprised to hear that I don't really mind this segment. and actually overall enjoy this particular episode. But I certainly won't object to anyone else finding it disturbing, because, like, objectively, it truly is. But the non-canon context of the grossness is such that, in my opinion, it doesn't cross the line into deeply, primally disturbing, like the Sideshow Bob face stuff. Even other cartoons have pulled off similar body horror jokes without prompting such a primal reaction, like Family Guy or Rick and Morty. Shows like those have an established fantastical element to them, such that your suspension of disbelief is a bit wider than with a regular episode of The Simpsons, which at heart is still a relatable family sitcom. When gruesome things happen to them canonically, it's a lot more upsetting than if it happens to, say, Peter Griffin or Ash Williams. Or how about this? On the subject of Sideshow Bob and, well, faces, let's dig into the idea of context a little further by discussing two other very different TV shows, Fraiser and Doctor Who. In the second episode of Doctor Who's 2005 season, we meet a character billions of years in the future named Cassandra, who is the last living human being, and is literally just a slab of skin with a face, due to thousands of years worth of cosmetic procedures. That shit's pretty fucked up, I'm not gonna lie. However, within the context of a fantastical science fiction show like Doctor Who, a character like this isn't really all that disturbing, because it kinda makes sense in this futuristic sci-fi setting. Now, let's extrapolate that to our other show, Fraiser. Imagine if there was an episode of Fraiser where Dr. Fraiser Crane learns that his brother Niles will be undergoing an experimental cosmetic procedure, and when Fraiser goes to meet his brother after the surgery, he finds that Niles now looks like this. If there was ever an episode of Fraiser like that, I am 100% sure that every single Fraiser viewer would projectile vomit and then immediately write a letter to their representative in Congress to have the show immediately canceled and all copies of the episode launched into the sun. This would be outrageously disturbing in a show like Fraiser, despite the fact that it's totally fine in a show like Doctor Who. That's why shit like this works, and this doesn't, and I don't think I can put it any more clearly than that. Am I crazy for being okay with some of these scenes, but not others? I don't think so. But if you ask the internet, I am. There are a handful of YouTube compilations out there of supposedly the most disturbing scenes in The Simpsons ever, and not one of them that I could find makes any mention of these Sideshow Bob scenes. Like, am I living in a fantasy world? Do these episodes not even exist? Are they all just a fever dream nightmare of body horror that only I can see? If I was gonna try and muster up anything positive to say about this gross running gag, I suppose one could argue that, in a weird way, it does return the show to its more subversive roots. In a time where the go-to place to watch The Simpsons is on the frickin' Disney Channel, maybe stuff like this can serve as a reminder that, hey, not all cartoons are just made for kids. And I guess that's part of what we loved about Sideshow Bob to begin with. Okay, that's it. Rant over. But after all that violence, I think it is time for a palate cleanser. So, if you've made it to the end of this, what do you think? Is Sideshow Bob ruined, or do you still love the character despite some dark twists and turns? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button for more in-depth analysis of our favorite family.